Anything Goes is currently playing at the Prince Edward Theatre, London, and Song and Dance is currently playing at the Shaftesbury Theatre, London.
Sunday evening on One begins at 6:40 when Bill Oddie visits the Cheltenham International Festival of Music.
Just look at this stuff.
At 7:15, Siegfried has a clear out, and Baldrick is told to clear off.
Sure, Baldrick, carry on with your cleaning elsewhere. And by the end of tonight, I want that dining table so clean I could eat my dinner off it.
A family crisis in Who Will Love My Children.
You can't just come in here and take my kids away. Nobody can do that.
They can.
That's a lie. It's a damn lie, Lucille.
Everyman at 10:20 looks at the controversy surrounding the murder of Vincent Chin.
I pleaded guilty to manslaughter on that. I did just like anybody else. I went to take my licks because I thought sure I would go to jail.
Molly Dodd is being pursued at 11:10.
You stopped me on the street. You invited me to the Bahamas. I said no. Now, just because you found out where I live does not mean that we have a relationship.
And this is Sunday evening on BBC1.
Over on BBC2 now, an outrageous musical satire lifts the lid off American television evangelism, Glory, Glory. Here on One, Clint Eastwood leads the oddest platoon, Kelly's Heroes, in just over 20 minutes. And that's after the news and sport now, with Martyn Lewis.
Iraqi troops seize 35 British servicemen in Kuwait, but the Ministry of Defence is optimistic they will be released. The Prime Minister is cutting short her visit to the United States because of the deepening crisis caused by the Iraqi invasion. And Iran's President Rafsanjani is ready to restore diplomatic relations with Britain broken since the Rushdie affair. Good evening. 35 British servicemen have been seized by the Iraqi troops who've invaded Kuwait. The men were military advisors to the country's deposed government. In London, the Ministry of Defence said it had been assured by Iraq that the arrests were temporary and was optimistic the men would be released. 3 of the 11 Americans who disappeared during the invasion have now been set free in the Iraqi capital, Baghdad. The Prime Minister is to cut short her visit to the United States because of the deepening crisis caused by the Iraqi invasion.
The servicemen were sent on loan to Kuwait to train the Emir's armed forces. British experts have been doing that job since the early 60s. They wear Kuwaiti uniforms, which were discarded after the invasion. The Ministry of Defence says that Iraqi troops took the 35 Army and RAF men from their camp 20 miles outside Kuwait City earlier today. They say the Iraqis seemed to know who they wanted. Some men were taken, others were left behind. In and around Kuwait City, the British liaison team consists of 46 Army and 20 RAF men and their dependents. Their senior officer, a colonel, is not in Iraqi custody. He's trying to negotiate. The Iraqis took his men to the Kuwaiti officers' mess.
We've had just one telephone call, in fact, from one of the officers who described, in fact, that they were being very fairly treated and were just being moved from one location to another. And so, I mean, certainly it was reassuring what we heard from him.
The minister said threatening Iraq would not be helpful. Negotiations were being channeled through the British embassies in Kuwait and Baghdad, and he said he had no idea why the men were taken.
It may well be that there is some view by Saddam Hussein that he can prevent Britain from joining in action against Iraq if he takes hostages of this kind. Well, he must be taught very clearly that that is not acceptable and that he can't blackmail us in that way.
It is possible that the Iraqi military, and knowing of their expertise and the help that they would be able to be to the Kuwaiti forces, thought they'd just take them out of circulation until they had finished the occupation. If that's the case, it's still a scandal.
Under Saddam Hussein's control, detained British servicemen could be used as a powerful lever. So far, though, the British government is hoping that the men were held in the confusion of war.
Kuwait's Iraqi-controlled radio reported tonight that a new cabinet has been formed to govern the country. It claims the 9 members are all Kuwaiti army officers. Kuwaitis in exile say they are Iraqis. Arab attempts to resolve the crisis have been set back by the cancellation of tomorrow's summit in Jeddah. No reason has been given. Iraq has denied that its troops have entered a neutral zone between Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Some reports said they were 1 mile from the border. The first pictures of the effects of the fighting in Kuwait showed damage to the television tower. Between 600 and 800 people are now thought to have been killed or injured since the invasion.
All communications from Kuwait have now been cut, but tonight the first eyewitness account to emerge from the country. Briton Jeremy Upton and his Kuwaiti wife and daughter drove across the border into Saudi Arabia. He explained what happened when the invasion began.
My wife's cousin said he saw a Iraqi jet fire a missile into what we thought was the Kuwait airport area. And looking north from this area called Karain, we could see bombs, probably tank fire, hitting just east of the city. You could actually see the smoke and dust coming up. It must have been 5 or 6 within a few minutes. Judging from that, we thought they'd, were bombarding the city, so I said, that's it, let's get out.
These pictures supplied by Iraqi television today show demonstrations in Baghdad and Basra following the invasion. Not surprisingly, they're in support of what Iraq describes as the Free Provisional Government of Kuwait. Earlier, the Iraqi-installed new Kuwaiti radio said a people's army would be formed, and then Iraqi troops would withdraw. King Fahd of Saudi Arabia is seen here talking to Iraq's deputy president in Jeddah, but tomorrow's proposed Arab summit there has now been cancelled. It had been suggested that the Emir of Kuwait, who escaped to Saudi, might meet President Saddam Hussein face to face. The Americans, who will soon have 3 aircraft carriers heading for the Gulf, are conscious that Iraqi assurances of withdrawal emanate from a regime which promised faithfully not to invade Kuwait in the first place. British defences are being reinforced too. In addition to the destroyer HMS York, which is docked in the Gulf, the Armilla patrol will soon consist of 2 frigates as well. No official explanation has been given as yet for the calling off of tomorrow's summit in Jeddah, but the reason is likely to be quite simple. They have very little to talk about. The Emir of Kuwait is unlikely to want to meet the Iraqis while his country is still occupied by them. And the Iraqis, despite their protestations to the contrary, seem to have little intention of leaving. Michael Macmillan, BBC News, in the Gulf.
The United States has repeated its demand that Iraq withdraws its forces unconditionally from Kuwait. President Bush said that all options for dealing with the crisis, including the military one, were still open. The White House briefing came as the Prime Minister, who's in America, said she'd be cutting short her visit because of the Gulf crisis.
Mr. Bush spent the day out of sight but not out of touch, sequestered at Camp David and trying to work out what to do next. His Secretary of State, Jim Baker, reported on the failure so far of diplomatic pressure on Iraq. The military men, Defense Secretary Dick Cheney and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Colin Powell, presented the military options. Within the last few minutes, Iraq's ambassador to Washington has described things as back to normal in Kuwait. He says Iraqi troops will start pulling out tomorrow and has warned against any attempt to intervene. He's also commented on concern about Iraqi designs on Saudi Arabia.
Iraq also emphatically and categorically denies the report suggesting that Iraq harbors designs against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Which is what the Iraqis were recently saying about Kuwait. To try and nip in the bud any further territorial ambitions of Saddam Hussein, Mr. Bush is thought to favour a blockade to try and stop the flow of Iraqi oil exports, along with the economic and trade embargoes already announced. Though a plan for airstrikes against selected Iraqi targets has also been drawn up. Mr. Bush believes that to be effective, any action must be international and has been consulting by telephone with world leaders. There's concern here that Gulf Arabs will not cooperate out of fear of the Iraqis. Mrs. Thatcher, who's in Colorado, has also been consulting by telephone with EEC leaders and the Saudis. She's cutting short her trip, stopping off here in Washington on Monday for a brief meeting at the White House before returning to London. Keith Graves, BBC News, Washington.
Britain and all her European community partners are to impose strict sanctions against Iraq. Oil imports from Iraq and Kuwait will be stopped, arms sales banned, and Iraqi assets frozen. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Brian Hanrahan looks at the message Iraq is being sent.
It's not the chants of demonstrators outside their embassies, but the murmur of diplomats that Iraq's ambassadors around the world are monitoring. The first message, coming loud and clear, is that the United States would be prepared to fight for Saudi Arabia. The second, by implication, is that Kuwait is not worth a war. That will have been reinforced by the European Community meeting in Rome. Their decision will deny Iraq a market for nearly half its oil. But by turning to economic sanctions, the Europeans look less likely to support the use of force. The pressures on Iraq become long-term rather than short, and the chances of them being effective depend on the degree of international support. The permanent members of the UN Security Council spent the day trying to agree terms for punishing Iraq. The United States wants a near-complete embargo on trade, investment and arms. But the reality is that only Arab support could make an oil blockade work, and China wants to give the Arabs a chance to settle their quarrel first. That muddies the waters. Egypt's President Mubarak and the leader of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, conferred today as part of an Arab convulsion of confused diplomacy. The Arab world is split, and there's a universal reluctance to involve outsiders in Arab disputes.
Arab leaders are capable to find the solution for this problem without any foreign intervention at all.
Saddam Hussein's ambassadors will want to bring him good news, and their advice will be delay an Arab summit, prevent a united Arab view from developing, and hope that will hold the rest of the world at bay. And the bravest spirits may caution the Iraqi leader not to threaten foreigners, especially Americans, in case that inflames US public opinion.
President Rafsanjani has said Iran is ready to restore diplomatic relations with Britain, which were broken off 18 months ago over the Salman Rushdie affair. But the Foreign Office has reacted cautiously, saying Britain first wants a substantive gesture of goodwill from Tehran.
President Rafsanjani's declaration followed a decision from Iran's National Security Council. It said recent comments by the Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd had met the Iranian Parliament's conditions for resuming diplomatic relations. In a letter to a Conservative MP last week, Mr. Hurd said there was no question of the British government or people wishing to insult Islam.
I would like to have decent relations with Iran for many reasons, partly because of the hostages in Beirut, and partly because Iran is an important country, and it's not in our interest that we don't have relations with them.
But Britain believes serious obstacles still lie in the way of full diplomatic relations. Iran has not yet lifted the death threat against Salman Rushdie, although the Foreign Office is laying greater stress on two other conditions: the release of Roger Cooper, the British businessman held in Iran for almost 5 years on spying charges, and help in securing the release of British hostages in Lebanon, including Terry Waite. But the Archbishop of Canterbury has welcomed today's news.
Well, it's very welcome news, because there is no doubt that the government of Iran has more influence on the situation of the hostages than any other government does. Most welcome news.
It's wonderful news that Iran wants to re-establish diplomatic relations with our country. That means Roger will be released. Personally, and I'm speaking for Roger, I hope he'll be released with a clean bill of health, that they'll wipe out all charges.
The Foreign Office said tonight it was studying Iran's statement with interest. It brings renewed ties a step closer, although Britain remains adamant that it's for the Iranians to make the next move.
Leaders of Britain's North Sea oil workers have called an all-out unofficial strike from tomorrow morning. The stoppage is in protest at threats to sack 1,000 contract workers who've been staging sit-ins over safety standards. They are now refusing to leave their platforms.
The first signs of a major escalation in the dispute came this morning when 80 contract workers on Marathon's Bray Alpha platform downed tools. They say their action is in support of nearly 1,000 of their colleagues who are still occupying 2 floating accommodation vessels chartered by Shell in the East Shetland Basin. It was the issuing to these men of dismissal notices last night which has led to the all-out strike call. Organisers say it'll involve 10,000 personnel on 100 installations and that it could develop into an indefinite stoppage.
I would anticipate that it'll be a fairly intense summer.
So this is a strike which could go on for months if need be?
Yes, if we have to keep going at them, that's what we'll do.
But the men's employers have condemned their action, urging them to return to shore for discussions.
We would call upon our workforce to react properly in this matter and respect the contractors' wishes
that they come ashore and discuss their grievances. To date, they have not done that.
The oil companies are blaming intimidation by a handful of troublemakers for the continuation of this dispute. But if tomorrow's strike goes ahead, it could affect the majority of oil and gas platforms from the northernmost sector of the North Sea to fields off the East Anglian coast.
British Rail is investigating its second train crash in 4 days. A driver was killed early this morning when his train hit a stationary holiday express at Stafford Station. 20 passengers were injured.
The driver who died was returning 4 empty carriages from Stoke-on-Trent to Birmingham when he crashed at about 15 miles an hour into the rear of a Manchester to Penzance train carrying mainly holidaymakers. British Rail say it was normal procedure for the empty stock to come into that platform behind the Penzance train.
I shall hold personally a full inquiry. Obviously, I need to check what the driver did, the braking, the signalling, and all the normal things that one would do on this occasion.
20 passengers were slightly hurt and were later sent on to their holiday destinations. On Wednesday, 30 people were injured at Reading Station when a commuter train pulled into the wrong platform and hit a stationary train. And it comes at the end of a week in which British Rail's quality and reliability was sharply criticised by the official passengers' watchdog body. The exact cause of today's crash may be revealed early next week.
The broadcaster Bernard Falk has died at the age of 47. He suffered a heart attack while on a speedboat on the River Thames. Bernard Falk appeared on a succession of BBC current affairs programmes, including 24 Hours, Nationwide and Newsnight. More recently, he presented the travel show Breakaway on Radio 4. Fellow broadcaster Frank Boff said tonight he was a one-off. He made people very happy. Now, with news of athletics and the rest of today's sport, David Davies.
Steve Cram, whose career has so often been disrupted by illness and injury, may miss the chance to defend his 1500 metres title at the European Athletics Championships in Yugoslavia next month. A stomach complaint forced him to pull out of today's 3A's championships in Birmingham, costing him the opportunity of claiming an automatic place in the team.
Cram's absence from the 1500 metres field left the selectors with a major headache. They're due to name their team for the European Championships tomorrow and must now decide whether to give him more time to prove his fitness. Ironically, the race itself was to ease their problem when Tony Morell, one of Cram's chief rivals for a place in the team, was controversially bundled off the track after tangling with Mark Rowland on a hectic last lap. It left Neil Horsfield with a clear run to victory. He's now sure to go to Split, so too will Peter Elliott. Cram must wait to discover if he's to get the chance to join them. Earlier, Tom McKean confirmed his potential to win a European medal as he only just failed to get the better of the outstanding Kenyan William Tanui in the 800 metres. And in the 200 metres, John Regis produced the sort of commanding performance in taking the title that marks him down as one of Britain's great hopes for gold next month.
England's cricket selectors have named an unchanged 12 for the second test against India, which starts at Old Trafford next Thursday. And on yet another outstanding day for batsmen, Graham Gooch, the England captain, was again in prolific form with 87 for Essex against Nottinghamshire. But Desmond Haynes made the day's biggest score, 173 for the championship leaders Middlesex against Glamorgan. England's rugby union fullback Simon Hodgkinson scored 9 points, but he couldn't prevent his side losing the second test to Argentina 15-13. And racing, the Michael Stout train Cartagena made up for her disappointing performance in this season's Oaks by winning the Vodafone Nassau Stakes at Goodwood. Cartagena finished last in the Epsom Classic, but today hit the front 2 furlongs from home. The commentator, Peter O'Sullivan.
Cartagena has taken it up from Moon Cactus. Starlet's improving on the right of the picture. They're running down to the furlong marker now, and it's Cartagena being pressed by, in the royal colours, Starlet, getting a great roar from the crowd here, willing her on. Starlet on the near side, Cartagena on the far side, Walter Swinburne and Pat Henry. Cartagena from Starlet inside the final 100 yards. Cartagena holding Starlet. It's going to be Cartagena the winner as they come to the line. Cartagena has won it and Starlet is second.
The Queen Mother has been celebrating her 90th birthday with other members of the royal family. She told the thousands of people who'd gathered at Clarence House that she was having a marvellous day and that everyone had been so kind.
90 today, and on one of the hottest days of the century, the Queen Mother presided over an enormous birthday party outside her London home. Thousands of well-wishers joined in. Some had been waiting since yesterday, and nearly all had brought flowers, cards, and a variety of gifts they hoped the Queen Mother would appreciate. The Guild of Toastmasters had the same idea, but on a grander scale. By tradition, this is a day when the Queen Mother becomes almost lost in a sea of children, and that's exactly how she likes it. She was surrounded for about 20 minutes before, responding to the cheers from the crowds, she began a lengthy walkabout. And for the first time, she went right out into the Mall, where thousands more were waiting. Above the cheers, a 41-gun salute could be heard as it was fired in Hyde Park. And in the heart of the city, the bells of St. Paul's Cathedral rang out in celebration for much of the afternoon. After the public festivities, the Queen Mother was joined by the rest of her family at the gates of Clarence House. And as they prepared to enjoy a birthday lunch in the privacy of the gardens, it seemed only one member of the royal household wanted to savour the celebrations for just one moment longer.
That's the BBC News Tonight. Good night.
Hello, the heat wave is over. That'll please the M1 and a good many others as well, even those of you who are having a little bit of interference on your television reception. Today, the last of the 90s, 35 degrees Celsius and 95 Fahrenheit at Hurstmonceux in Sussex. Tonight we'll find a band of cloud coming southwards, perhaps some light rain or drizzle with it, one or two heavier showers getting into the north and northwest. Quite cool in parts of Scotland tonight. The temperature is down to 8. Still a sticky 18 in some parts of the southeast, but I think tomorrow morning you'll certainly notice it much fresher as these northwesterly winds start to feed down across the country, introducing those much fresher conditions. The winds, by the way, quite strong up here in the northeast, especially through the Northern Isles. There's tomorrow's weather chart then, these two fronts introducing the much fresher conditions, but really bringing very little rain with it. We'll find that band of cloud in the south tending to break up during the morning, even though it may still give the odd spot of light rain and drizzle, mostly on hills and coasts. And then it'll turn out to be a fairly bright day with a good deal of sunshine. The top temperature around about 25, that's 10 degrees down in today. The rest of the country, bright and quite sunny, though there'll still be one or two heavy or blustery showers in northern parts of Scotland, but in the west they'll tend to die out. That's it from me. Good night.
Two strangers.
Take me home.
It ruins everything.
How can you think like that?
It's an accident. It's a mistake.
A baby!
Someone else in our house. Two disrupted lives.
What were you expecting? Sympathy?
I just wanted someone to talk to.
Take Me Home, Part 1, beginning Monday at 9:30 on BBC1.
Now on One, our late evening film stars Clint Eastwood, Telly Savalas and Donald Sutherland as part of a renegade platoon who embark on a maverick mission in search of a fortune. Kelly's Heroes.